Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Philosophy remains the handmaiden to the queen of the sciences, which is theology, and therefore it frankly is incumbent upon every faithful Catholic to have some working knowledge of philosophy, knowing at least how the structures and categories work together for the sake of illuminating the greater mysteries of the faith. And we can all begin at whatever level we have and grow from there. Joining me to talk about four Catholic philosophers who, and it's the book is called Rejoicing in the Truth, is Richard Spinello, professor of management and practice at Boston College and a member of the adjunct faculty at St. John's Seminary in Boston. Richard, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to be back on your show.
Well, it's good to speak with you again. This is a good book, and I want to begin by having you share with all of our listeners how central good philosophy is, to thinking rightly about our faith.
Yeah, that's a very good topic. Let me first say just a word before I answer that question. A word about this book, which I think tries to tackle that question quite directly, and people should read it to understand those issues. They might be a little bit intimidated by the title, Four Catholic Philosophers. This is not a philosophy book primarily, and it's a book written for Catholic lay people. So it's a book basically that tries to introduce the thought of these four great philosophers of the last century, but spends a lot of time talking about their lives, sketching out the profile of their lives in pretty broad strokes to kind of get an essence of their sense of their personalities and convictions. So it's mostly biography. Their stories of their lives against the backdrop of the drama of World War II. And the key thing about their lives, I think, which begins to answer your question, is that they're searching for the truth. They are pilgrims. Jacques Maritain and Edith Maritain thought of themselves as pilgrims of the absolute. They were looking for the absolute, looking for God, basically. And they find that truth through faith and reason working together. So the point is that if we just have the faith, it's not going to be enough. We need reason as well to kind of explain to us the truths of the faith. So this is what's important about the relationship between philosophy and theology. The deep connection between faith and reason. The other thing that I would stress is that this was the theme, of course, of one of the great encyclicals of John Paul II, Fides et Ratio, faith and reason. It's really only Catholic philosophy that, and these four thinkers in particular of the last century, that now seek answers to the existential questions. Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? Why is there evil? And again, it's faith and reason that can really answer those questions and answer them well. Now, why can it do that? Well, because it has philosophy has or should have a sapiential, as John Paul II put it, or metaphysical dimension. The ability to get beyond the physical, to try to understand spiritual realities like the soul and why the soul is needed. So faith tells us, we have a soul, the soul is immortal, and philosophy tells us why that is the case, why we necessarily have to have a soul. We can't have knowledge without it. So that's how the two, I think, essentially go together. A lot of secular philosophers of the last century kind of mocked this relationship. Heidegger, for example, said that Christian philosophy was like iron made of wood, I think was his phrase, a contradiction in terms. But I don't think that's true at all. I think these secular philosophers are way out of line in making that claim. I think faith and reason are meant to go together. They're complementary, and both of them will lead us to the whole truth. You're not going to get the whole truth without faith and reason.
Now, I couldn't agree more. And like you've rightly mentioned, we have a plethora of especially secular modern philosophers, all of which are clamoring for the intellectual attention of the faithful and therefore our listeners. Where do we begin then? How does one start studying or reading to start thinking rightly about existence and the world and therefore the faith?
Well, I think the best place probably to begin is Aquinas. I would say that someone wants to have some understanding of Catholic philosophy. The only place really to begin is Aquinas, because he's really at the core of everything, and he really addresses all of these questions very well. And there's no doubt that the philosophers that I looked at in this book were either Thomist or Thomistically inspired. So it's very important, I think, for Catholics to have some awareness of Aquinas. There are a lot of very good introductions to Aquinas, very good books about him that will introduce you to the main elements of his thought, and they will begin to appreciate how philosophy gives us the answers to a lot of the theological mysteries and theological problems that they may think about. How it begins to answer these existential questions that I talked about. And then you can go on and read about, read the philosophers that I have written about, Maritain or Karol Wojtyla or Edith Stein. But I think the baseline should be St. Thomas Aquinas. I think it's unfortunate that Thomism has sort of lost its central place in our Catholic universities, at least in some of them anyway. I think that's kind of unfortunate. I think for the Church it's unfortunate that Thomism has lost its central place because, after that kind of happened in the 60s and 70s when Thomism was kind of cast aside, we really haven't seen any great philosophy and any great theology. I mean, you look around today, there are no great philosophers or theologians. We don't have von Balthasars, we don't have the Lubachs, we don't have Wojtylas, we don't have Ratzingers. We just don't have these people. And the one thing they have in common is that they were all schooled in Thomism. They knew Thomism and they knew it very well, and they developed their thinking based on Aquinas. Now they moved away from him in some sense. They disagreed with him on certain things, but Thomism sort of gave them a baseline. So that's what I would recommend to people, and I think again it would be good if the Church could get back to putting a lot of emphasis on the reading of St. Thomas Aquinas. One of the things I've been thinking about with our new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, relatively new Pope anyway, is that it wouldn't be a bad idea, I mean, for him to copy his predecessor. Leo XIII wrote this great encyclical, Aeterni Patris, so back in the 19th century, where he brought about the revival of Thomism. And we see it in the works of Maritain and Gilson and the people I write about in my book. There was a tremendous revival of Thomism in the 20th century. And I think we need that revival again. And maybe Pope Leo XIV, being an Augustinian, could write a new Aeterni Patris that would try to get a revival of interest in maybe Augustine and Aquinas. That might be a little bit of a novel move on his part, but I think the Church could use that to try to get particularly Catholic universities to really get committed to Catholic philosophy, and those certainly are the two greatest, right? Augustine and Aquinas. And if we could get our schools to be teaching them again and get people to read and study them, I think we'd make a great deal of progress.
Let's pause there, Richard. I'm talking with Richard Spinello, Professor of Management Practice at Boston College, author of Four Catholic Philosophers. He's talking with us about how Catholics can start thinking about philosophy. Continuing on the other side, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Richard Spinello, Professor of Management Practice at Boston College, author of Four Catholic Philosophers, Rejoicing in the Truth. Richard, you were just finishing up sharing with us how every Catholic ought to have some introduction to the thought of Aquinas and Augustine, not just in schools. So for all of our listeners right now, what are some ways in which they can begin looking at Aquinas and or Augustine?
Not quite sure what commentaries on Augustine would be appropriate. A lot of the ones I've worked with are rather technical, so I'm not quite sure which ones are in print. But I think probably in terms of the works of Augustine, everybody could understand the Confessions. So I would recommend that people begin with that particular book. And you could probably find reasonably good commentaries on the Confessions. As far as Aquinas goes, and then with Augustine, from there you could probably move to the City of God. I mean, those are his two great books. So if someone could read and master those two books, that would be a very good accomplishment. As far as Aquinas goes, the key work, of course, is the Summa Theologica. That's the great work of Aquinas. There are many other books that he's written. He wrote 8.5 million words, so he was quite prolific. But the Summa is the best book to read, and I think you could. Most people could probably understand the Summa, but there's some very good commentaries that would go along with it. I would particularly recommend the works of Joseph Pieper because I think he gives a pretty good introduction to Aquinas and provides a lot of very good background that I think would prepare someone to read the Summa. So those are the two philosophers that I would recommend that Catholics begin to take a look at. And once again, the idea is that the truth of revelation, to which I commit myself by the faith, has to be understood by human reason, I think, in order to be personally possessed by me, to become sort of truth for me. And the only way that really happens is through the accompaniment of philosophy. So philosophy is going to, if you read Aquinas, you're going to begin to understand the truths of revelation. And the fact that they're not unreasonable, that they can be supported by reason. So faith and reason working together is very important. And I think Aquinas and Augustine give us some very good philosophy to support the faith. So they will nourish the faith, right, and support it. And I think that's what people need today. Just the whole example of a soul. I've been doing a lot of work lately on the work of soul because I think it's been pushed out of philosophy, and contemporary thinkers get rid of the idea of a soul. They're materialists. The Church teaches that there's a soul, an immortal soul, but I think you can also strongly support that particular principle of the faith by reason. There are very good reasons why there has to be a soul, why the intellect has to be immaterial and therefore has to be immortal. You find that in both Augustine and in Aquinas. So they will give you the reasons why there is a soul, there must be a soul, why that soul has to be immortal. And that's the kind of thing that I think could be very important for people, so that they'll be prepared to deal with the real world, when they hear all this stuff about artificial intelligence and, we as human beings are no more than machines. To realize that we are more than machines. We're not machines. We're embodied spirits. We have a soul, an immortal soul.
There are a few books I want to, if you're listening right now to this and you're thinking about how to just start dipping your toe into the water of what Catholic philosophy can look like. There are a few things I want to introduce you to, but just to echo what Richard has said, there's a great simplified commentary on St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa. It's called A Tour of the Summa by Monsignor Paul Glenn. I used it to teach high school before. It's an extremely easy approach to everything that St. Thomas Aquinas talks about in the Summa. And it presents a very rational, systematic presentation. The other one, if you're looking at philosophy, just to, again, echo what Richard has been saying, Aristotle for Everybody by Mortimer Adler, Difficult Thoughts Made Easy. So I'm going to include these two in the description of today's program, but these are very simple introductions into how to form our minds to think rightly about life and therefore the faith. Now, Richard, therefore, by virtue of what you've already shared with us, we can start thinking about these four masterful philosophers. So you've got Jacques Maritain, Edith Stein, Dietrich von Hildebrand, and Karol Wojtyla. Just briefly, let's go through each of them. What was Jacques Maritain's great contribution to philosophy, where he began, especially with Aquinas, but then how he developed his own framework?
I think if we look at these philosophers that I have written about in this particular book, and we maybe focus on what they contribute today. So, in other words, why are they relevant to the church today? I think there are several reasons for that. I think, first of all, what they present is a theocentric picture, a God-centered picture. It's not anthropocentric, it's theocentric. I think that's extremely important. I think they speak in the language of metaphysics, which the church needs today. The church often today tends to speak sometimes a little too much in the language of sociology and psychology. It leads us to speak more in the language of metaphysics, which recognizes an eternal order of being and nature. These philosophers understood the limits of phenomenology. That's the big movement of the last century, phenomenology, which has a great deal of merit, but it has limits too, because it's not metaphysical. It only describes what appears to us in consciousness. It really can't get beyond that. I think the other thing that these philosophers do for us or contribute to contemporary dialogue in the church about issues is that they support and argue for Christian anthropology versus what I think is common today is negative anthropology, right? I think that's what we get from postmodernism. I think that's what a lot of people embrace. That goes back to Sartre, who said, our existence precedes our essence. So in other words, we show up in the world, we have no essence, we just make ourselves into whatever we want to be. It's a position that really exalts freedom. Christian anthropology says, well, look, you have a nature. You have a body and a soul. It's a sexually differentiated body. It's an integral part of your personhood. It's not an appendage or something exterior to the self. And this union of the intellectual soul and the body is for the sake of the soul. The soul needs the body. And this embodied spirit, which is what we are, is ordered to certain goods that fulfill us. So we have this fixed nature that all of us share in common. That gives us equality and dignity. And it tells us that morality is something that can be universal and something that's timeless, because our nature really at this level doesn't change. So having this nature is sort of a bridge to morality, the morality that we call natural law. These philosophers put a great deal of emphasis on that. Jacques Maritain does, Karol Wojtyla does, a little less so Edith Stein, but we definitely get it also in von Hildebrand, though he comes up with some novelties in ethics. So this Christian anthropological vision, which is very important, I think, for the church today, is reaffirmed quite boldly in the thinking of these philosophers. The other thing that I would emphasize in the thought of these thinkers is the contribution that von Hildebrand and Wojtyla make on the topic of love. I write about that in the book. A lot of confusion today about love. Mm-hmm. Part of John Paul II likes to talk about the crisis of truth in Fides et Ratio. Part of the crisis of truth that we face today is the confusion about love. People don't know what love is. We hear slogans like love is love. They don't know how to differentiate spousal love from friendship and so forth. These two books, Love and Responsibility by Karol Wojtyla, the Nature of Love by Dietrich von Hildebrand, two of the greatest books on love ever written, period, and certainly two of the great philosophy books of the last century. So that's an incredible contribution, I think. What I also find interesting, particularly in the writings of Edith Stein, is her deep reflections on the relationship between the individual and community. That's another, I think, significant contribution to philosophy, trying to steer a middle ground between any sort of the totalitarian tendencies of her day and any kind of atomized liberalism, stressing the importance of community and the common good along with individual freedom. And one of the important insights we find in Edith Stein is to say that to ask what kind of person should I become is also to ask what kind of community, what kinds of community should I be a member? In other words, it's very important for me to pick the right communities if I want to be this particular kind of person. And that thinking is what led her into the Carmelite. She became a Carmelite nun because that was the community in which she could most fully fulfill herself and live up to her aspirations as a Catholic. So there are some of the contributions I think that these philosophers have made. I think they've made others. They are all committed to a realistic epistemology. That's very important today also, to get away from this German idealism of Kant.
Yeah. We're going to have to stop right there, Richard. Thank you so much for that wealth of wisdom. I've been talking with Richard Spinello, his book, Four Catholic Philosophers, Rejoicing in the Truth. Let's dip our toes into philosophy to understand our faith. I'm Marcus Peter.